The flicker solidified into a reality Marcus had desperately sought but instantly regretted finding. It was a vehicle, listing slightly into the damp scrub that bordered the interstate shoulder, its hood propped open like a supplicating mouth. It was an older model, a faded, almost grey-blue sedan, and its hazard lights blinked with a pathetic, failing regularity. Marcus hesitated, lifting his foot off the accelerator. He eased his sedan past the disabled car, intending to continue, but the movement inside the old car made him brake. A figure, bundled in a thick, dark sweatshirt, emerged from the driver's side, turning to face the oncoming lights. It was a woman, small-framed, illuminated briefly by the harsh beam of his headlights. She raised one hand, not waving frantically, but holding it out with a tired, quiet desperation that felt worse than panic. Marcus checked his rearview mirror. Nothing. The black ribbon behind him remained empty, suggesting he was the first vehicle to pass in a long time. The financial consultant in him screamed, "Keep driving. This is a trap, but the exhausted, vulnerable human argued, she's in trouble. It's 2:30 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, He activated the turn signal, the loud, mechanical click sounding offensively loud in the oppressive silence of the cabin. He pulled over 50 feet ahead of the disabled car, ensuring the engine remained running and the doors were locked. He cracked his window just an inch. The air that rushed in was thick and cold, smelling distinctly of brackish water and pine resin, the true scent of the swamp. The woman approached slowly, crunching gravel underfoot. As she drew nearer, Marcus could see her face was pale and smudged, her hair tied back messily. She looked cold, perhaps 20-something, but aged by fatigue and fear. "Sir. Please, can you help me?" Her voice was thin, almost reedy, but steady enough to convey genuine distress. "I think the battery died, or maybe the alternator. I don't know cars. Do you have roadside assistance?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone measured and professional, the same tone he used when delivering bad news to clients. "My phone died an hour ago." "No signal anyway," she said, nodding toward the dense curtain of pines. "I've been sitting here for over an hour. If you could just call someone for me from the next exit, or even just let me ride with you until we hit the gas station." Marcus looked at his watch, the red glow of 2:38 a.m. a constant, accusatory presence. He was losing time he didn't have. He also knew that even if he drove another 45 minutes to the next well-lit stop, he'd still be unable to focus, still swimming in the exhaustion loop. A few minutes of interaction, of doing something real, might be the cognitive jolt he needed. His gaze flicked to the briefcase secured under the passenger seat, heavy with the weight of his future. The package was the priority. "Look, I'm on a very tight schedule," Marcus said, rubbing his eyes, "but I have a charger. If you want to grab your phone, we can try to get a signal, or I can call for you." He felt marginally safer having her approach his car rather than him walking back to hers. Thank you," she breathed, relief flooding her pale features. "I'll just be a second." She hurried back to the old blue sedan. As she opened her driver's side door, the interior dome light flared weakly, revealing a chaotic mess inside, scattered papers, crumpled fast food wrappers, and what looked like a half-eaten bag of chips. Marcus took the opportunity to discreetly push the expensive leather briefcase further under the floor mat with his foot, ensuring it was entirely hidden from view. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his frayed nerves. He was committed now. He was helping her, minimizing the risk, and getting back on the road. The woman re-emerged, gripping a sleek, modern smartphone. She approached his window again, the screen dark. "It's just dead. Completely." Marcus unlocked his door just enough to push the heavy-duty auxiliary charger cable out to her, careful not to allow the door to open fully. "Plug it in. We'll wait 5 minutes for it to charge enough to dial out." She took the cable and leaned against the door of his car, her presence suddenly much closer, much more substantial in the cold night. As she fumbled with the connection port, Marcus noticed something odd. Her hands, though dirty, were not the hands of someone who had been trying to fix a broken-down car. They were long, slender, and surprisingly clean under the grime. He watched her carefully as she finally managed to connect the charger. The phone screen remained stubbornly black. "It's not taking a charge," she muttered, frustration mixing with a sudden, sharp anxiety that seemed too performative. "Give it a minute," Marcus insisted, reaching to turn up the heat in his car. The woman shifted her weight, and in doing so, her sleeve rolled up, revealing not the pale skin Marcus expected, but a flesh of dark leather wrapped tightly around her forearm, something secured with heavy, purposeful stitching. It was not the kind of wrapping one wore for warmth. Suddenly, the ready desperation in her voice evaporated. Her head snapped up, and the look in her eyes, no longer tired or fearful, but starkly cold and calculating, hit Marcus like a physical blow. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a jolt of pure, glacial terror. "No, I don't think we have a minute, Marcus." She had used his name. Before Marcus could react, before he could slam the lock button or throw the car into drive, a shadow detached itself from the absolute blackness of the pine trees behind his sedan. It moved too fast, too silently, for a person simply walking. It was a dense, male shape, dressed entirely in black, and it was already at his driver's side door, reaching. Marcus instinctively twisted the steering wheel, hitting the gas pedal with a force that surprised even himself. His tires screamed against the asphalt, fighting for purchase. But he was too late. The man in black slammed a heavy, specialized tool, a metal device used for breaking locks or windows, against the driver's side window. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed instantly, shattering outwards with a thunderous crack that echoed violently in the desolate night. Shards of glass rained down on Marcus. He shielded his face, swerving wildly, his only thought to escape the immediate, crushing grip that reached through the broken window, tearing at the steering wheel. The woman at the passenger side, no longer pretending to be distressed, was already trying to rip the door handle open. She yelled something Marcus couldn't hear over the grinding roar of the engine and the ringing in his ears. He swerved again, hoping to clip the man hanging half inside his vehicle, but the assailant was too quick, clinging to the frame like a parasite. Marcus felt a searing pain as the man's free hand found purchase on his shoulder, digging in with terrible strength. "The case. Where is the case?" the man roared, his voice low, gravelly, and utterly devoid of human emotion. Marcus knew the game was over. They weren't looking for a casual robbery, they were looking for the deliverables. His fear was replaced by a furious surge of survival instinct. He wrenched the wheel hard to the left, crossing 2 lanes toward the median, praying the sudden shift would dislodge the attacker. It worked partially. The man's grip loosened, but not before he delivered a brutal, aimed punch to Marcus's jaw, sending a blinding flash of pain through his skull. The sedan, out of control, struck the retaining wall of the median with a deafening, metal-rending screech. The impact threw Marcus violently against his seatbelt. The airbags deployed instantly, filling the cabin with a choking cloud of powder and the metallic tang of burning rubber. Silence returned, heavier and more absolute than before, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and Marcus's ragged breathing. He was dazed, blinded, and tasting blood. He heard the crunch of approaching footsteps. 2 sets. Pushing the deflated airbag away, Marcus squinted through the smoke. The man in black stood at the driver's side, undamaged, his silhouette enormous and menacing against the faint highway lights. The woman was at the passenger door, prying it open easily now, the internal locking system defeated by the crash impact. "Get out of the car, Marcus," the woman commanded, her voice now flat and authoritative. "We just want the package." Marcus, gripping the mangled steering wheel, looked down at his feet. The hidden briefcase. They had done their homework. They knew his name, his mission, and the value of his cargo. The exhaustion, the financial pressure, his mother's warnings, it all coalesced into one terrifying, singular reality. He had been lured into a carefully orchestrated ambush miles from anywhere. He knew he couldn't fight them. They were professionals, and he was an overworked consultant bruised and trapped in a wrecked car. "It's under the seat," Marcus mumbled, his voice thick with defeat. The woman moved quickly, dropping to her knees by the passenger footwell. The man kept his massive frame blocking the shattered driver's window, watching Marcus like a predator assessing a stunned prey. Marcus, however, was already moving. The punch to the jaw had jarred loose the last vestiges of his mental inertia. He didn't reach for the door handle. He reached for the only weapon available in the ruined car, the heavy, carbon fiber shaft of the deployed air freshener that had snapped off its mount near the rearview mirror. As the woman's hands closed around the leather handle of the briefcase, she made a slight triumphant sound. This was Marcus's only chance. He lunged across the center console, ignoring the shriek of pain from his ribs, and drove the makeshift weapon, a rigid, sharp piece of plastic, forward and down, aiming blindly for the woman's exposed neck. She let out a choked cry, stumbling backward, dropping the briefcase. The man at the driver's side roared in reaction, momentarily distracted from Marcus to look at his downed partner. That was the fraction of a second Marcus needed. Ignoring the open wound on his shoulder, he flung himself out of the driver's side window, not through the jagged opening the man had made, but scrambling over the lower half of the shattered frame, diving headlong into the darkness of the median scrub. The marsh grass cushioned his fall slightly, but the impact winded him. He heard the man shouting, the woman whimpering in pain, and the frantic slamming of car doors. They would be on him instantly. He scrambled on his hands and knees, dragging himself deeper into the dense, wet shrubbery. The I-95 corridor had swallowed the car, now, it had to swallow him, too. He didn't know which direction was safer, only that he had to get away from the immediate sound of the heavy boots crashing through the roadside detritus. He heard the distinct click-clack of a round being chambered into a firearm. Marcus, the man's voice echoed, dangerously close. We are not playing games. Drop the case and we walk away. Marcus realized the briefcase was still back in the car. They must have thought he grabbed it during the escape. He didn't correct them. He pressed his body flat against the damp earth, smelling the thick, decaying aroma of the swamp, a scent that now smelled distinctly like survival. He heard the crunching sound stop. They were listening. He held his breath, the cold mud soaking through his expensive suit jacket. He was deep in the primal world now, miles away from spreadsheets and closing deals, operating only on the desperate knowledge that if he moved, if he made one sound, the black ribbon would consume him entirely. Marcus reached for the phone, his fingers tracing the smooth glass screen one last time. He pressed the button to lower the power window. The mechanism whined, a mechanical sigh of resignation in the quiet night, and he stopped it precisely at the 4-inch mark, creating a narrow slot just wide enough to push the device through. Victor lunged forward, his movements far too sharp and unburdened for a man whose wife was dying inches away. His hand shot into the gap, gripping the phone with surprising force. Marcus felt a momentary spark of resistance, a brief, foolish instinct to pull it back, but Victor's grip was absolute, cold, and immediate. Victor didn't even glance at the screen. He didn't begin punching in the emergency number. Instead, he straightened up, holding the phone not like a tool of rescue, but like a prize won in a game. The desperate panic that had defined his face minutes earlier vanished completely, replaced by a cold, unsettling stillness. It was the face of a successful actor who had just finished his monologue and was waiting for applause. Marcus felt the immediate, sickening freefall of realization. The whole scene, the expensive coat, the gleaming Escalade, the precise detail of the shellfish elegy, was a beautifully crafted stage set. The mile markers here are terrible, Victor said, his voice now low, utterly devoid of strain, sounding smooth and expensive, like fine bourbon. That was a good line, wasn't it? Very specific. Before Marcus could process the words, before he could slam the accelerator to the floor, Victor reached inside the heavy wool coat. The object Victor withdrew wasn't an EpiPen, but a heavy, matte black handgun, equipped with a short suppressor that made it look less like an instrument of violence and more like a professional, clinical tool. The realization hit Marcus with the physical shock of cold water. His caution had merely prolonged his demise, not prevented it. The locked doors were a joke now. Victor placed the cold muzzle of the weapon against the narrow opening of the window, pressing the barrel just below Marcus's ear. Now, you are going to unlock the door, turn off the engine, and exit the vehicle very, very slowly, Victor commanded. His gaze drifted to the back seat of the Honda, then back to Marcus's terrified eyes. And don't look at Sarah. She really is worse than I let on. The pain in Marcus's wrist was a blinding firework, momentarily overriding all logical thought. He knew the impact of the enforcer's weapon on the window would be the end of resistance. Survival demanded movement now. He couldn't yank his arm back, the leverage was all wrong, and Victor was too strong, too perfectly positioned in the narrow gap. Instead of pulling away, Marcus did the only thing he could think of. He lunged hard toward Victor, throwing his body weight against the driver's door while simultaneously slamming his free left foot onto the accelerator pedal. The old sedan roared, the unexpected surge of engine power and the grinding of the tires spitting gravel into the night. The sudden, explosive forward movement caught Victor completely off guard. The narrow window gap, which had been his perfect vice, now became a critical liability. As the car surged forward, Victor's body, anchored outside, jerked violently against Marcus's pinned right wrist. Marcus screamed, a sound ripped raw from his diaphragm as the ligaments stretched and tore under the strain. The pain was astronomical, a white flash behind his eyes, but the shock of the car's movement provided the fraction of a second he desperately needed. Victor's grip instinctively lessened, the surprise overriding his iron command. Marcus wrenched his arm backward, tearing free from the remaining pressure. He collapsed against the steering wheel, gasping, cradling his throbbing, likely broken wrist, while rising in his throat. The enforcer, who had been mid-swing with his heavy weapon, was thrown wildly off balance by the sudden jolt of the sedan. His blow missed the tempered glass by inches, striking the rough asphalt instead, sending a shower of orange sparks into the humid air. Victor, enraged by the loss of his physical anchor and the immediate flight of the prey, stumbled backward toward the massive black Escalade. "Get him. Don't let him leave," he bellowed, his cultivated composure shattered, replaced by raw, furious malice. Marcus didn't look back. His vision swam with pain and panic. He slammed the gear lever into drive with his left hand, ignoring the searing white-hot agony radiating from his right arm. He mashed the accelerator to the floor, steering wildly with one hand. The sedan fishtailed momentarily on the dirt shoulder before the tires caught traction. He launched the car back toward the interstate access road, the engine screaming in protest. In his rearview mirror, the black Escalade's massive frame instantly detached from the shadows, its headlights flaring blindingly bright. The vehicle accelerated onto the access road with smooth, deadly efficiency. The chase was on. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with his left hand, his right arm resting uselessly in his lap, the skin already swelling and darkening where Victor's fingers had clamped down. The realization settled over him with chilling finality: he was injured, alone, his phone stolen, which meant the $28,000 tied to his banking apps was already compromised, and he was being actively hunted down by violent, organized criminals. The exhaustion of the last week was irrelevant, he was running purely on adrenaline and the primal terror of the chase. He swerved the car onto the I-95 northbound on-ramp, merging violently into the high-speed lane, praying the oncoming truck traffic would buy him a few crucial seconds of distance from the relentless headlights growing rapidly larger in his mirror. He needed to get help. He needed a weapon. But most immediately, he needed to put distance between himself and the black Escalade that was closing the gap with terrifying speed. Every beat of his heart was a drum against the silence of the night, demanding escape. The shift was instantaneous, brutal, and mechanical. It was the sound of a circuit breaker flipping, extinguishing all pretense of shared humanity. Victor secured the phone, the glass screen warm against his palm, and the polite mask, the strained, concerned expression of a man seeking urgent medical aid, slid away, revealing a chillingly vacant stare. The eyes that met Marcus's were calculating, depthless tools of assessment. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir," Victor intoned, his voice dropping an octave, losing its smooth, cultured modulation. It was now rough, flat, and devoid of emotion, like gravel poured over cold metal. This was not the voice of a panicked husband, it was the voice of a predator securing its spoils. The hand holding the phone did not move to dial any number. Instead, Victor's left arm shot through the narrow gap of the lowered window, moving with a speed and practiced precision that belied his expensive clothing. Marcus, frozen for a microsecond by the sonic assault of the voice change, registered the movement too late. Victor's fingers locked around Marcus's right wrist, just above the cuff of his shirt. It was a grip born of sheer strength and focused malice. It wasn't a grab, it was a vice. A searing, white-hot line of pain shot up Marcus's arm, causing him to instinctively clench his jaw so hard he heard the joints pop. "The keys," Victor commanded, his face now mere inches from the window frame, the scent of expensive cologne mixing sickeningly with the metallic tang of adrenaline. "Ignition. Now." Marcus's world collapsed into the agonizing pressure point on his wrist. Victor used the thin edge of the window frame as leverage, twisting Marcus's hand downwards and inward toward the ignition slot. Marcus tried to recoil, but the narrow confines of the car cabin worked against him. His elbow jammed into the center console, trapping the arm. Every nerve ending in his hand screamed in protest as the bones ground against each other under Victor's unrelenting pressure. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his escape was now dependent on retaining control of that vital, small, brass and plastic piece of equipment hanging from the steering column. He fought back on instinct, pushing his weight against the locked door, trying to generate lateral force, but Victor was firmly planted on the soft shoulder of the I-95, his expensive leather loafers offering excellent traction against the grit and damp earth. "Don't make this harder," Victor hissed, pulling sharply. The movement sent a fresh spike of anguish through Marcus. He felt the keys begin to slide reluctantly out of the ignition slot. If they came out, the steering column would lock, the engine would cut, and he would be utterly immobilized, a sitting duck in the middle of a deserted highway. Marcus's peripheral vision, heightened to a dangerous clarity by fear, registered movement on the passenger side. It wasn't a soft rustle of leaves or the reflection of the Escalade's running lights. It was a mass. A sudden, silent wall of shadow that materialized from the absolute blackness of the savanna forest line. This was the enforcer. He was significantly larger than Victor, a monumental figure draped in dark, heavy clothing, hood up, his face obscured by the low angle and the deep shadows cast by the scant highway lighting. The enforcer moved with a terrifying economy of motion, not quickly, but relentlessly, like a large carnivorous animal zeroing in on a vulnerable spot. He didn't speak. He didn't make noise. He simply was. Marcus's terror intensified 1,000-fold. The threat was no longer localized to the agonizing grip on his wrist, it was flanking him, surrounding him. He was trapped in a metal box with two distinct forces attempting to dismantle his control. The enforcer reached his side, his vast bulk pressing close to the passenger door. In his hand, he held something heavy, a short length of metal, possibly a reinforced wrench or a large security lock, wrapped in dark tape to dull the shine and mute the sound. The enforcer raised the weapon and slammed it down with quiet, controlled force. Dong. The sound wasn't the metallic shriek of catastrophic damage, but a heavy, sickening thud that resonated deep within the cabin and, more importantly, deep within Marcus's chest. The passenger window, thick laminated glass, didn't shatter, but it bowed sickeningly inward. The impact momentarily stunned Marcus, the sheer physical reality of the threat washing over him. The enforcer was sending a clear, brutal message: cooperate, or we will open this box ourselves. The pain in Marcus's wrist was now a secondary concern, a dull, throbbing background noise against the surging siren of panic. He had to break free. He had to move. Survival demanded violent reaction. With a primal roar ripped from his throat, a sound that shocked even himself in the quiet isolation, Marcus twisted his torso, using the momentum to swing his free left arm back. It was a clumsy, desperate haymaker, fueled by pure adrenalized terror and the need to create a 1-inch margin of escape. It wasn't aimed to knock Victor out, it was aimed to create space. The punch connected solidly with Victor's head, high on the cheekbone, just near the temple. The impact was soft yet resonant, eating flesh over bone. Victor inhaled sharply, a gasp of surprise and pain. His head jerked back, and his grip, for the barest fraction of a second, loosened. That fraction was Marcus's life raft. Ignoring the blinding, nauseating pain in his right wrist, which now felt like a broken, useless piece of meat, Marcus violently yanked his arm back into the car. The sudden, savage release sent him sprawling against the driver's door, which shuddered slightly against the enforcer's silent pressure. Bastard. Victor spat, momentarily disoriented, rubbing the sore spot. He didn't drop the iPhone, however. His grip on the device was ironclad, the primary objective was secured. Marcus didn't have time to savor the minor victory. His keys were still halfway out of the ignition, dangling precariously, swinging like a pendulum of doom. His heart hammered against his ribs, demanding immediate flight. But the logistics of escape were overwhelming in the panic. He needed to reinsert the keys fully, shift the transmission, and steer a heavy SUV while his primary operating hand was crippled and throbbing. He fumbled with the keys with his left hand, his vision blurring. He shoved them back in, hearing the crucial click of the tumblers resetting. Victor was recovering instantly. Seeing Marcus struggle to restart the sequence of escape, he lunged again, not for the wrist this time, but aiming to plunge his hand deeper into the cabin to grab the gear selector, or perhaps to simply strike Marcus across the face. Marcus knew the moment he engaged in another physical struggle, the enforcer would shatter the passenger window and swarm the cabin. There was only one option left: brute force escape. He slammed his foot down on the brake with his left foot and, simultaneously, shoved the automatic gear selector into drive with his left hand. His right hand, useless and pulsing with agonizing pain, gripped the steering wheel just enough to keep the massive vehicle pointed straight. He took a deep, rattling breath and then jammed the accelerator pedal to the floor. The SUV roared, the engine shaking off the silence of the night. Marcus wrenched the steering wheel slightly, using the immense weight and momentum of the vehicle to ram the driver's side door against Victor's leg. Victor screamed, a short, sharp sound of unexpected pain and outrage, and stumbled back. The enforcer, seeing the sudden acceleration, took one final, decisive action. He brought the heavy metal object down one last time, not on the glass, but on the rear driver's side tire, near the valve stem. It was a silent, precise movement, executed just as the vehicle started to roll. Marcus felt the immediate, powerful lurch as the rear end squirmed sideways, but the momentum was too great to stop. He was moving. He was escaping. He pushed the gas pedal deeper, ignoring the agonizing protests of his mangled wrist, ignoring the horrific silence now replacing the confrontation, focused only on the yellowed center line rushing toward him. Then, 4 seconds later, as he reached 40 miles per hour, the silent attack manifested its deadly purpose. A massive, concussive sound, a deafening, hollow whomph, shook the entire chassis. It wasn't the clean snap of a bullet, but the heavy, deliberate explosion of a rapidly deflating tire succumbing to extreme pressure. Marcus's escape had been guaranteed, but it had come at a catastrophic cost. The SUV immediately began to veer violently toward the median, the entire rear weight shifting dangerously. He was free from the men, but his battle with the machine had just begun. He looked up into the rearview mirror, catching a fleeting image that would haunt him for weeks, Victor standing in the periphery, massaging his bruised leg, holding the stolen iPhone up to the thin light, a triumphant, chilling grin replacing the mask of pain. The enforcer stood still, impassive, watching the wounded animal flee. They didn't need to chase. They had crippled their prey. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with every ounce of strength remaining in his left hand, fighting the severe pull, the horrifying, grating screch of bare steel rim meeting asphalt already beginning to drown out the engine noise. He knew, with dreadful certainty, that he had secured his life, but he had lost far more than he knew. The flight was agonizing, desperate, and loud, a symphony of metal and fear echoing into the silent darkness of the I-95. Marcus didn't move for a minute. The car's interior air, thick with the smell of scorched metal and adrenaline, was finally still. His hands, frozen into claws around the steering wheel, slowly uncurled, leaving damp, painful indentations on the hard plastic. He leaned his forehead against the airbag cover, taking inventory. Left wrist, throbbing intensely, likely sprained. Head, pounding from the vibration. But he was breathing, and he was surrounded by light and people, distant, oblivious people filling up their tanks or heading into the brightly lit convenience store. He twisted his body stiffly and pushed the door open. The sound of the latch clicking seemed deafening in the sudden quiet. He nearly collapsed on the asphalt. The driver's side of the sedan was a gruesome spectacle. The alloy wheel was ruined, the sharp edges of the remaining steel rim had carved a deep, black groove into the pavement that trailed back up the ramp. The entire front quarter panel was smoking slightly, the suspension system visibly askew. It was a vehicle that screamed crime scene. He had bought his freedom by rendering his primary means of transport unusable. The physical damage was terrifying, but the intangible loss was devastating. He patted his pockets reflexively, a futile gesture he knew would yield nothing. The phone. His work, his finances, his communications, all secured by layers of biometric data and passwords that Victor was now undoubtedly trying to peel back. If Victor had found the phone's primary unlock method, which Marcus had foolishly enabled for easy access, it was already too late. Victor would have the offshore accounts, the encrypted client lists, and the proof he needed to dismantle Marcus's carefully constructed professional life. He had to stop the data stream. He needed a kill switch. He glanced around the bustling service area. A payphone, an ancient, merciful piece of technology, was mounted near the ice machine. It was his only clean connection to the outside world, a signal untraceable by his own compromised device. With renewed, desperate urgency, Marcus stumbled toward the payphone, fumbling a wad of crumpled bills out of his wallet and frantically hunting for quarters. He jammed the coins in, his fingers sleek with sweat, and dialed the one number he had memorized since college, a contact reserved only for situations where everything else had failed. It rang twice. A crisp, professional voice answered, utterly calm. Status report. It was Anya. Code black, Marcus gasped, leaning his head against the cold metal casing of the booth. Victor has the primary drive. Execute total wipe protocol. Now. Initiate firewall defense level 5 and sever all existing lines to the Zurich account. I repeat, total digital quarantine. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, but no argument. Acknowledged, Marcus. Initiating wipe. Did they get the hard drive? No. Only the phone. Hurry, Anya. They know where I am, and they'll be here soon. Go. Get off the road. I'll initiate emergency measures on my end. The line clicked dead. Marcus hung up the receiver, his body momentarily drained of all energy. He had bought himself time in the digital realm, but the real-world clock was ticking. He staggered back toward the pool of light, trying to melt into the background of late-night truckers and yawning families. He scanned the interstate entrance ramp he had just descended, his heart hammering against his ribs. And there it was. Just appearing over the crest of the hill, their massive, black silhouette absorbing the sickly yellow light. The Escalade. They hadn't wasted a minute. They were driving slowly, confidently, the predator savoring the final moments before the kill. Victor knew Marcus had stopped here. The enforcer was driving, moving with the brutal, inevitable speed of fate. Marcus had mere seconds. He couldn't risk the car, or the truck stop's open parking lot. He saw a narrow, overgrown dirt path leading behind the motel, presumably an old service road. It was dark, tight, and risky. It was perfect. He turned and ran toward the shadows. Marcus did not know how far he had traveled on the bare rim. 4 miles felt like 4 centuries. The violent rattling, the ear-splitting shriek of steel grating against the concrete of I-95, was a painful reminder that he was teetering on the edge of control, desperation, and violence. Finally, a flickering green sign appeared, exit 41, about 30 miles from Savannah, and crucially, a small red symbol indicating a rest area and gas station. As Marcus turned onto the ramp, he did not brake, he simply let off the gas, allowing the weight of the ruined vehicle to slow itself. The left wheel rim was significantly worn down, leaving a deep groove and a thin wisp of metallic smoke rising from the friction. He drove slowly, almost furtively, into a secluded corner of the truck stop parking lot where the yellow glare of the high-mast lights was partially obscured. He slumped over the steering wheel, his body shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving a void filled with sheer terror and overwhelming fatigue. The gruesome screech still echoed in his ears, mixing with the low hum of the air conditioning running at full blast to combat the humid Georgia heat. He needed to get out. To check. The car doors were always locked, but now, opening one required superhuman will. Marcus forced himself to pivot, swinging his legs out of his beloved Honda Civic, which now looked like a wounded veteran of a brutal fight. His left arm throbbed violently. As the dim truck stop lights illuminated it, he saw his wrist. Where Victor had squeezed, the skin was bruised a deep wine purple, the fingerprints seemingly stamped permanently onto his flesh. It was the only tangible evidence of the attack that had just transpired. He stumbled into the 24-hour convenience store. Inside, everything was too bright, too sterile, too normal. A bored young woman scrolled on a phone behind the counter. Marcus went straight to the electronics section, purchasing a cheap, prepaid cell phone, a device he would mentally label a burner, and a large bottle of water. He did not call the police immediately. It was a strange, almost illogical decision, but one rooted in a skewed priority. In his panic, the most urgent thing wasn't reporting Victor, but confirming what was lost. His car key was safe in his pocket, but the phone was gone. The phone was the gateway to his life, his job, and, most critically, his money. He sat back in the car, inserting the new SIM card into the cheap phone, and used a trembling finger to power it on. The screen lit up with the budget carrier's logo. He took a deep breath, trying to stabilize his heart rate before making the first and most important call, the bank. It was 3:45 a.m. The voice that answered the exchange was that of a night shift employee, tired and clipped. "Good morning. Delta National Bank Customer Service. How may I help you? I am Marcus Thorne. I need to report a robbery. My phone was stolen about an hour ago, and I need to lock down my accounts immediately," Marcus said, his voice hoarse and almost unrecognizable. The employee, Brenda by her automated tone, offered zero empathy. She focused solely on protocol. "I understand, Mr. Thorne. I need to verify your identity. Please provide the last 4 digits of your social security number and your registered billing address." The verification process dragged on like torture. Once complete, Marcus asked her to check the most recent transactions. "I know this sounds crazy, but I was violently assaulted for the phone. I am certain they tried to access it immediately." Brenda typed. The methodical clicking of the keys was devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the storm raging in Marcus's chest. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. I am reviewing the transaction history." "Oh." That brief moment of silence stretched into a decade. "Mr. Thorne, I see 2 recent electronic transactions. Both were executed via our mobile application. What time frame?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping in dread. The first transaction was at 3:05 a.m., a transfer of $14,000 to a cryptocurrency account. The second transaction was at 3:17 a.m., another $14,000 transfer to an online payment service. Marcus felt his stomach clench. A total of $28,000. Exactly. $28,000 was moved in a 12-minute window, sir. These transactions were authenticated either biometrically or via a stored PIN within the device. Cold sweat broke out. He realized the horrifying truth. During the protracted struggle between him and Victor, while he was fighting to keep the car under control and push Victor away, the phone must have been unlocked. Victor must have taken advantage of the chaos to quickly press Marcus's thumb onto the fingerprint sensor, or perhaps, simpler still, Marcus had enabled facial recognition, and the low light and sweat during the fight had allowed Victor to bypass the lock screen. Victor hadn't needed a complex password or two-factor tokens. He had simply needed rapid access to the app Marcus trusted and used every day. Can you reverse those transactions? Marcus asked, his voice clinging to a fragile hope. Brenda replied with a standard, corporate tone, devoid of warmth. I regret to inform you, Mr. Thorne, that due to the nature of the transfers, authenticated via your device, we need to conduct an internal investigation first. These funds are now outside our banking system, likely residing in untraceable crypto wallets or payment entities. We will open a claim, but I must be honest, the chances of recovery are very slim. She continued to explain forms, waiting periods, and liability clauses for cases of customer fraud or coerced device unlocking. $28,000. It wasn't just a number. It was the deposit for the new office lease he had signed in Atlanta, the foundation for his upcoming freelance career. It was 3 years of careful savings, the guarantee of a future he had traded for tired nights of driving like tonight. If Victor had pulled a standard pistol and robbed him of the $200 in his wallet, Marcus would have only felt anger and relief. But Victor had done something smarter, more modern, and infinitely more cruel. He hadn't just taken Marcus's life, he had stolen Marcus's future. This financial blow was more shocking than any physical punch last night. It caused not immediate pain, but a slow, cold numbness. The physical violence had ended, but this financial violation, this invisible looting, seemed irreversible. Marcus hung up. He sat in the dark stillness of his car, staring at the purple bruise on his wrist. Victor had used his kindness and exhaustion as a perfect algorithm to unlock the treasure. He wasn't a common highway robber, he was a risk operator who had turned Marcus's compassion into a nearly $30,000 security loophole. The feelings of humiliation, exploitation, and financial injury settled on Marcus, heavier than the residue of last night's panic. Dawn was beginning to break over the horizon, but for Marcus, everything had just gotten darker. He realized that in this era, crime no longer required a mask and a gun, it simply required a clever script and a smartphone. That realization began to carve a hard, cynical new identity into the core of Marcus Thorne. The cynicism was a heavy cloak, insulating him from the world but choking his closest ties. His fiancée, Sarah, watched the transformation with frightened helplessness. The man she loved, ambitious and inherently trusting, was replaced by a nervous shadow who double-locked windows and compulsively checked the external security cameras. Dinner conversation revolved around encryption standards and the futility of traditional law enforcement. He couldn't relax, even the quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed like a conspiracy waiting to unfold. One evening, Sarah found him meticulously cleaning his car, not the exterior, but the interior, removing loose change, wiping down the dashboard, and discarding every receipt. "What are you doing, Marcus?" she asked softly, leaning against the garage doorframe. "Erasing the metadata," he muttered, not looking up. "Anything they could use to profile me again. They knew I was a late-night driver, they knew the model of my phone, they probably knew my travel patterns. I'm minimizing my digital footprint. I should have done this months ago." "You were robbed, honey, not targeted by the CIA," she sighed, the exhaustion in her voice evident. "You need to let the paranoia go. You're punishing yourself." "No, I'm learning the rules of the new game," he retorted, his voice sharp. "The rules are that decency is a vulnerability, and the state will not protect you from a sophisticated, hybrid attack. I will not be vulnerable again." The rift between them widened. Sarah saw a man drowning in hypothetical threats, Marcus saw a partner who refused to acknowledge the reality of the danger, the organized precision that had gutted his sense of safety. The ultimate test of his new philosophy came 6 months after the incident, on a rainy Tuesday night. Marcus was driving home from a late meeting, navigating a dark, tree-lined stretch of highway near the city limits. Up ahead, he saw the unmistakable flash of hazard lights. A small, older sedan was pulled onto the shoulder, its hood up, steam rising into the wet air. A young woman stood beside it, clutching a cell phone, looking distressed and alone. Instinct, the old, compassionate Marcus, pulled at the wheel. The memory of Victor, the feigned medical emergency, the look of calculated innocence, that terrifying memory slammed the brakes on his impulse. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He slowed the car, just enough to verify the scene. The woman looked genuine, shivering in the rain. Every logical synapse screamed at him, *pull over. It's the right thing to do, *. But the phantom sound of the air rifle's puffed, and the subsequent grinding shriek of the rim against asphalt echoed in his ears. He scanned the tree line, searching for the ghost of the enforcer. He looked for the telltale signs, a second vehicle hidden just beyond the guardrail, a subtle movement in the shadows. He saw nothing suspicious, but the absence of evidence no longer meant safety, it meant better camouflage. He pressed the accelerator. As his headlights swept past her, illuminating her desperate face for a fleeting moment, a wave of nauseating guilt washed over him. He felt the weight of her potential suffering, the abandonment, the betrayal of the social contract. Yet, beneath the guilt, a hard kernel of survival solidified, he was safe. He had chosen self-preservation over moral obligation. He drove the rest of the way home in silence, the rain drumming a steady rhythm of accusation on his windshield. He had passed the test, but the victory tasted like ash. He had become the very kind of indifferent observer he once despised. The police had failed him, and his own moral compass had been shattered. Now, Marcus understood that if justice was to be served, it would not come through official channels. The $28,000 might be long gone, but the principle remained. He had spent his career as a financial analyst tracking complex transactions. If the criminals thought routing the funds through a decentralized exchange made them untouchable,